Australia is in the middle of an energy revolution. The Albanese government wants over 80% of electricity generation to come from wind, solar and hydropower in the next 6 years. That's more than double what it is now. And both major parties have committed to cutting carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. It all comes wrapped in a government guarantee of a greener and cheaper future. But will it be? If the costs blow out, who will pay? If the lights go out, who will be responsible? And the rush to net zero goes far beyond re-engineering the electricity grid to reach into every aspect of our lives. So it's time to take a long, hard look at the task ahead and to ask, what is the real cost of net zero?
We actually are on target for 82% renewables by 2030.
It's a revolution built on a promise.
Renewable energy is incredibly cheap because its fuel is free, because it's the sunshine and the wind.
But as power costs soar,
we have to swap basically lighting for heating, heating for eating.
Our energy prices in the last 5 years have gone up by more than a third.
Weather-dependent electricity generation is being found wanting.
One of the issues with renewable energy is it doesn't work 24/7.
The fact that the sun sets every night is not a problem if I have 5% of my energy from solar. It is a significant issue if I get 100% of my energy from solar.
Now the winds of change are turning.
The construction of wind farms is a very brutal industry on the landscape.
They didn't consult with the traditional people.
It all comes as the demand for reliable electricity is set to explode.
If we were to electrify everything, that would mean we would have to quintuple the size of the electric grid. I just don't see that happening.
So, is the plan for net zero now on a road to nowhere?
Well, Mike Tyson said, everyone has a great plan until they get punched in the face. I worry that we may get punched in the face with an interruption in our energy supply.
Mastering fire changed the course of evolution. Our distant ancestors captured heat and light. They learned to cook. That fed their energy-hungry brains. They grew to become human. Then one day, a big-brain human learned to do this. And this changed everything.
The fire at the heart of Victoria's electricity generation.
We've been producing energy from coal here from the 1920s. And Loy Yang B is the last in a line of coal plants.
About 1,000 degrees inside the boiler.
Here in the Latrobe Valley, coal is burned to boil water, and superheated steam turns a turbine at an astounding 3,000 revolutions a minute.
That turbine is connected to a generator, and the generator is 570 to 580 megawatts of electricity.
That big load of electrons is delivered in a heartbeat, through towering transmission lines connected to the familiar streetscape of poles and wires that link businesses and homes to instant, reliable power.
Electricity is measured in watts, and it takes about 10 watts to run this light. If it stays on for an hour, it will use 10 watt-hours of power. 1,000 watt-hours is a kilowatt-hour. You'll find that number written in your electricity bill as kWh. That's the price your retailer is charging for the number of kilowatts you use by the hours that you use them. 1,000 kilowatts is a megawatt, and that's the measure your retailer deals in when buying electricity in the wholesale market.
You can see the current price in Victoria is at $235, which, yes, because of the cold weather, essentially.
As long as you have the fuel, you can pretty much guarantee electricity on demand every minute, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
We use about 1,200 tonnes of coal per hour, and that enables us to send out around 1,140 megawatts, which is about 20% of Victoria's generation supply needs.
This is brown coal. It's not export quality, so it's cheap. It gave Australia a competitive advantage in the 20th century.
We were in the zone of the lowest, most competitive power prices in the world at that time.
Stephen Wilson has worked in energy in 30 countries for over 30 years.
You know, you were seeing wholesale prices around the sort of $20 to $40 per megawatt hour level, 2 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour.
Down there is a brown coal seam. It's been powering Victoria for the last 100 years, and it could go on powering Victoria for another 800, but we've decided we're not using it anymore.
It's delivered the cheapest, reliable energy that we've ever had. We were around about the 4th lowest OECD country in the world in terms of our power generation.
10 Australian coal-fired power stations closed in the last decade. There are 15 still running, but most are slated to close in the next 10 years. Loy Yang B is scheduled to put out its furnace in 2047.
You see the black flecks? Yep. That's the coal that hasn't burnt yet.
We'll likely become close to being the last power station that's running.
Alinta Energy owns Loy Yang B, and in April 2024, its chief executive sounded a warning.
You came here for truths and straight talking about the transition, so here's a doozy. Australians will have to pay more for energy in the future.
Which collides with this often repeated slogan.
Renewable energy is incredibly cheap because its fuel is free, because it's the sunshine and the wind.
It's a line that rings hollow for people like Belinda Jones, who lives just a short drive from Parliament House. She dreads the arrival of every electricity bill.
This is what I call a payday killer. It's come in at $1,073.31. My pay, which is the pay of most age pensioners, is around $1,144. This leaves me, after I pay this bill, $71.09.
Business is also under pressure as energy bills mount.
Our energy prices in the last 5 years have gone up by more than a third. Our gas prices in the last 12 months doubled. I know, talking to all of my peers across the manufacturing sector, energy is probably one of the key topics that they will talk to first.
And pledges of cheap, green power are a distant dream.
It will see electricity prices fall from the current level by $275 for households by 2025, at the end of our first term.
It was a promise so wide of the mark that the federal government is now subsidising everyone's electricity bill. Belinda's latest includes $75 of government relief.
$75 now buys you next to nothing, so that's why we are forced to shop at the food bank.
To understand why increasing wind and solar generation on the grid won't add up to falling power prices, let's break down the different parts of a bill. First, there are the retail charges of about 10%. We'll push them to one side and concentrate on 4 other costs. The wholesale charge, 35% of your bill. what you pay for the electricity itself. Then you have to pay to transport it through the network costs. Now, the transmission lines are about 8 to 10% of your bill. And then the distribution network of poles and wires, that's 35% of your bill. And finally, the green schemes, which are now a bigger part of everyone's bill, making up around about 10%.
And we'll focus on Australia's east coast, what's called the National Electricity Market. The Chief Executive of the Australian Energy Market Operator is Daniel Westerman.
So this is the NEM. It is one of the longest interconnected power systems in the world.
The grid stretches from Cooktown in far north Queensland as 40,000 kilometres of transmission lines link generators to towns and cities in New South Wales and Victoria. It crosses Bass Strait into Tasmania and runs west all the way to Port Lincoln in South Australia, connecting about 85% of Australia's population to power.
62% of generation on the grid comes from coal and gas, while the wind, solar and hydro share is 38%. To hit the government target, that number must more than double in the next 6 years.
Australia's electricity market will be 82% renewable under the policies of an Albanese Labor government.
By their nature, wind and solar generators cannot deliver power on demand.
Because the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time.
No power plant operates 100% of the time, but those running coal or gas have predictable sources of fuel.
So that means that, 98.5% of the time or greater, our plant's available.
On average, across a year, the best performing onshore wind farms will deliver about 40% of their maximum capacity. And between April and June this year, across the national electricity market, that number fell to 26%.
Capacity factor is important, availability factor is even more important. So you might say, oh, well, the coal plants aren't running at 90% capacity factor. True, but their availability is around that level, and that's what's important. Whereas we're replacing that almost always available generation with generation that's only available for a very small fraction of the time.
Australia also gets loads of power from the sun.
Australia has more rooftop solar per capita than any other country in the world.
This solar farm sits on 50 hectares. It has 82,000 solar panels and at peak generation will deliver 24 megawatts, and that would be, on a day like today, a bright sunny day in the middle of the day. But tonight the sun will go down and it will deliver 0. And across the course of a year, you'll get 30% of its plated capacity, or a little over 7 megawatts. And that's the issue with this kind of generation. By its nature, it is off more often than it's on.
We're reducing the energy security that we have as a nation.
Richard McIndoe ran Energy Australia for a decade and has been in the energy industry for 35 years.
We're moving from that very reliable fuel that we have in the ground to a less secure and less reliable source from renewables.
We're creating artificial scarcity all over the place, and when you create scarcity, you drive up the price.
Energy scarcity emerges everywhere. Wind and solar become the dominant form of generation.
Jim Robb, and I'm the president and CEO of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation.
He has one of the biggest jobs in the world of electricity regulation.
We oversee the entire interconnected grid in North America.
And his focus is keeping the lights on as those grids change the way they generate power.
The big issue has been wildfires, which you guys have as well.
Yeah.
The grid we inherited from our grandfathers, with largely a firm fuel supply, you knew within high degree of confidence that a particular asset would be available to serve load at any point in time. Now that we've moved towards a system that has much more uncertainty in the fuel supply, and in this case, fuel is sunlight and wind, and those are both difficult to forecast at the level of precision that we need for the electric grid.
Precision is essential in a bulk electricity system. Think of it as balance. Supply must always match demand to keep the system's frequency stable. If that balance is lost, the system collapses.
In a power system, you've got to match the generation output with the customer load basically almost exactly every second of every day continuously. And that's not a choice, that's just a result of physics and engineering. If you can't achieve that perfect balance, then you are at risk of collapsing the whole system within less than a minute. The frequency will fall and then the system can go into blackout.
Yeah, well, frequency here is the balance between supply and demand.
To maintain that frequency, you need generators with big spinning wheels like Loy Yang B. They keep the network stable and the lights on when there's a shock to the system, such as a large generator tripping off.
The stability that used to come from those big rotating turbines at coal-fired power stations doesn't come from a solar panel. It's a bit like riding a bike really slowly. When you don't have those big rotating turbines on the system, the power system can get a bit wobbly.
That's the magic of the old system that we had, was that, yeah, as we produced kilowatt hours, we also produced all of these things we call essential reliability services that keep the grid operating stably. As we lose that, we've got to recreate them through other assets, and we're going to have to pay for that capability.
So wind and solar generators can't be relied on to deliver power on demand, and at the moment can't set the electrical system's frequency or maintain its stability.
We built our electricity systems around the world with essentially dispatchable technologies for matching that frequency. Hello, Chris.
Mike, nice to meet you.
Michael Caravaggio is a Director of Research and Development at the Electric Power Research Institute.
If you use more electricity, I can give you more electricity. You use less, I can turn those down. With wind and solar, it's not like that, right? So the sun rises, that's when we have the electricity. The wind blows, that's when we have the electricity. Doesn't care what you or I do in terms of use of that electricity. That's a small problem when we build some wind and some solar. But that becomes a bigger and bigger problem as these technologies scale.
Turning unreliable generation into instantly available power means weather-dependent generators have to be hooked up to a complex and expensive life support system the old grid didn't need. It's what the boffins call firming.
So powered by the sun and the wind, firmed up with batteries and pumped hydro.
And each of these steps adds costs to the system.
Achieving all of that requires a larger, more complex, more expensive system than the system we grew up with.
And the inconvenient truth is the new system can't deliver reliable power without gas.
Look, gas is the ultimate backstop for reliability for a net zero power system.
And not just a little bit of gas, 15 gigawatts, enough power to run 15 million homes through 2050 and beyond. So gas is not the backup, it's the backbone of a weather-dependent grid which simply will not function as a reliable electricity system without it. Gas will be essential to cover the daily fluctuations in wind and solar generation, the morning and evening hours of peak demand, and the longer, still dark nights.
The more problematic issues are cloud cover that persists for multiple days, wind droughts that persist for multiple days. In June of last summer, so June of 2023, June 6th, Across the backbone of North America, we have about 60 gigawatts or 60,000 megawatts of wind capacity installed. One of the best wind areas in the world. They call it the Saudi Arabia of wind. On June 6th, 300 megawatts showed up. You know, that's a pretty big hole to have to dig yourself out of.
That's the kind of hole the national electricity market found itself in between April and June this year, when, under grey skies, wind generation repeatedly dropped below 15% of its maximum capacity for up to a week at a time.
We will have batteries, we will have pumped hydro, but we'll have times like we've seen earlier this year where there's not much wind and there's not much sun, and the gas-fired power stations are really required to back up the reliability of the grid.
So what we've seen is that you need to manage those near zero output hours from wind and solar. They happen. Unfortunately, they always happen. So you need essentially 100% backup for different periods to cover that need. Now, that is an evolving challenge to figure out the economics and how to make that affordable. Right now, what we typically see is a significant gas build-out. If we look at Germany and California, Germany is probably about 50 or 60% wind and solar energy right now. And they have 100%, over 100% coal and gas and biomass dispatchable technology to back that up. If you look at the case of California, they also have near 100%, but California also has the ability to import quite a bit of power from its neighbors to bridge that final gap. So all of our fleet leaders essentially have 100% backup.
Some claim grid-scale batteries can cover the energy gaps.
The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. It's all too hot. Well, the rain doesn't always fall either. We all drink water. It can be done. And the key is storing that renewable energy.
You can store rain in a bucket. Storing electricity is a lot harder and a lot more expensive.
In a helicopter, you know, there's no speed limit.
If you're wealthy, you can try the experiment of storing solar energy at home. Adventurer Dick Smith was an early adopter of the electric car.
I'm pro-renewables, and I drove in the first solar vehicle race from Darwin to Adelaide. I've got an electric car which is powered completely from the roof, except it isn't today because we had 3 days of cloud cover. I had to plug the car back into the power line, which is connected to a coal power station. It's down to about 40% capacity after 10 years. So I'm going to have to replace it. I'll use lithium battery now, but it's going to cost even more than $18,000.
Dick's solar cells and $18,000 worth of batteries don't come close to powering his car and his house, even on their best days.
You don't need 2 or 3 hours. You could need 3 or 4 days or even longer. That becomes prohibitively expensive. No Australian residential house has gone off the grid without having a diesel backup generator. It's not possible because the storage cost is just so incredibly high.
Now let's scale that up to running an electricity grid.
I'm Elliot Mainzer. I'm the president and CEO of the California Independent System Operator.
He oversees a grid that now boasts over 11 gigawatts of big batteries.
The batteries are able to take the excess energy during the day, store it, and then re-inject it for that 4 to 9 p.m. period in the evening when our grid gets stressed.
Batteries can't supply high power for long periods.
Right now, almost all of the batteries on our grid are 4-hour lithium-ion batteries.
And in dark, still winter months, there might be little wind or sunshine to charge them.
So at this stage, there is no grid-scale battery that could run a city like San Francisco for 4 or 5 days.
No. There's nothing. So the most significant storage we have is, of course, pumped hydro, and that's an old technology. But when we're talking about battery technology, we're really looking at 4, maybe 10-hour technologies, and they're nowhere near size to run large metropolitan or regions for days on end.
The physical constraints and huge economic costs of grid-scale storage explains why all operators of systems with high levels of wind and solar generation are coming to the same conclusion.
My personal view is that natural gas is going to play a very key role in the electric sector for a very long period of time, at least until we have a viable technology for long-duration energy storage that can be scaled to the level of terawatts of capacity. Right now, we don't have a technology that can do that in any sort of an affordable way at that kind of scale.
And that's a big problem because Australia's east coast is running out of gas.
Just go to the report of the energy market operator who said that energy shortfalls are likely as early as next year. So the Scarborough Energy Project is a $12 billion investment.
Meg O'Neill is the chief executive of Woodside, the company that began liquefied natural gas exports from Western Australia.
There was a warning earlier this winter saying we're approaching the crisis point. So I think we're dangerously close to that point already.
When an essential good becomes rare, the price skyrockets. To understand why the gas price matters so much in determining the wholesale price of power, we need to know one more thing about the way the national electricity market works, because it's also a financial market.
Most people probably don't know that energy in Australia is bought and sold every 5 minutes, and we manage the buying and selling and settle the trades just like the ASX.
Peak demand on the national electricity market is 35 gigawatts, or 35,000 megawatts. In this high-stakes game, the lowest cost generator bids first to meet demand. Other generators follow in cost order as the stack fills. But if the last megawatt needed for supply to match demand is $300, then that's what every single player in this game gets paid. Let's underline this fact. It's the highest cost of generation that sets the price of power, which is why this slogan is so deeply misleading.
Renewable energy is incredibly cheap because its fuel is free, because it's the sunshine and the wind.
But plugging the generation gaps they leave to build a reliable electricity system is proving remarkably expensive.
The fact that the sun sets every night is not a problem if I have 5% of my energy from solar. It is a significant issue if I want to get 100% of my energy from solar.
In the 3 months to the end of June, wind and solar only set the wholesale price of electricity for around about 7% of the quarter, and it was very cheap. When brown coal stepped in, the price stepped up to $12 a megawatt hour, and then came black coal, and the price went to $110. But look at the cost of everything that will be essential to keep the lights on in a weather-dependent grid. When hydro came into the marketplace, it was at $145 a megawatt hour. When gas set the price, it was at $184. And batteries, it set the wholesale price at $245 a megawatt hour. And as coal retires from the marketplace, it will be this end of the ledger which drives the price of power higher. The same story is emerging everywhere wind and solar are deployed at scale. We're often told that the lowest kind of electricity generation is wind and solar, but that's not what's setting the price in the wholesale market, is it?
No, I mean, typically, in an environment like we're in today, when, we're very, very high load, I would say probably it's natural gas generation.
California is the US state that's most like Australia's national electricity market. It has gone hard on renewables, shut down its oil and gas industries, and begun decommissioning nuclear plants. The result? It has the highest residential, business and industry power prices in continental USA. That crushing cost drew this admission from the California Public Utilities Commissioner in September.
We're in a transition and it's really hard, and right now we are dealing with an affordability crisis for energy in California for consumers.
Australian consumers face the same crisis for the same reason, and every future option is expensive.
As we get to a net zero system, it's really expensive if we don't have a dispatchable source like gas.
Australia has loads of gas, vividly shown in a flight over Gladstone. This is a Chinese-flagged liquefied natural gas ship, and it's off the port of Gladstone waiting to load. In fact, that port supplies the world with 5% of its liquefied natural gas. The gas story begins over 400 kilometres inland near Roma.
So what's it like for you hosting those wells on your property?
Oh, it's pretty lucrative. They pay you a pretty good upfront payment and pay you yearly to have them here, so it's like having an off-farm job.
Farmer Dave Jewell has 20 gas wells on his property.
It's been pretty good for the region though, given that it brings in jobs
a lot
and
of
income.
money for a lot of producers. The ones with the coal seam income seem to do more improvements than the ones without.
The gas from 1,400 wells flows to a central hub at Roma.
It increases the pressure of the gas to be able to get to the pipeline pressure requirements.
That pipeline runs to one of 3 export terminals at Gladstone.
When it hits here, it's cleaned and then it's cooled, and they get it down to minus 161 degrees Celsius. At that point, it becomes a liquid. It's put into those 2 storage tanks that you can see behind me and then exported overseas. There, it's turned back into a gas and it powers, well, just about anything.
These projects are high-risk, multi-year, multi-billion-dollar investments.
By the time you get there, you've spent around $18 billion and you've got many years of drilling ahead to maintain that gas supply.
The Queensland gas fields, like those in Western Australia, would never have been opened without foreign investment.
So you couldn't afford to develop this gas if you didn't have the export market.
Gas exports create jobs, taxes and royalties, but they hit a political storm when the domestic price soared after Russia invaded Ukraine.
Our gas that comes out of our seabed and our ground should be for our businesses and our households first.
Victoria's demand for Queensland's gas was profoundly ironic, given the southern state banned gas exploration and demonised the fuel.
Is there gas in Victoria?
Lots of gas in Victoria.
In New South Wales, things were little better, as landholders locked the gates against gas developments.
We will never, ever accept the Northern Rivers being turned into a gas field.
And gas has been caught up in the demonisation of all fossil fuel.
If we are to keep 1.5 degrees alive, fossil fuels has no ongoing role to play in our energy systems.
This ignores 2 critical points. Swapping coal for gas cuts the carbon footprint of electricity generation.
Gas is just 50% cleaner from a greenhouse gas perspective than coal. Coal is cheaper, but gas is cleaner.
And the weather-dependent grid under construction won't work without gas.
Well, our report outlines the criticality of gas, both on the electricity system and for industrial, commercial consumers, as well as heating for homes and businesses.
Energy producers warn the recent state and federal government conversion to gas has come too late.
It's hard to make a long-term investment decision when you have 10 years of history saying you're not welcome.
That demonisation has put the economy into a precarious position right now because we're not getting new supply coming in at a rate at which we need it.
Woodside owns half of the Bass Strait joint venture, which supplies domestic gas to New South Wales and Victoria, but it's running dry.
So there's things that we're doing, trying to just squeeze as much gas out of the fields as we possibly can to maximize recovery. That's good for us as a business, it's good for the state as our customers. But to do anything more material, it's a 5+ year lead time.
Santos has spent more than a decade and billions of dollars trying to develop a gas project near Narrabri in New South Wales. It's just hit another legal hurdle.
Given the history of Narrabri, I would certainly not want to be a betting person on timelines, but I think the best way to think of it is from the point of getting the pipeline licence, I think we could be flowing gas within 2 years or so.
The shortage is so acute that energy-rich Australia is building liquefied natural gas import hubs like this one in Wollongong.
And it doesn't seem logical to me that we'd support using gas as the energy source, just not from Australia.
Yes, that's a bit of a head-scratcher.
If we want to cut the cost of electricity generation, we need more gas, and the answer should be simple.
But Chris, the easiest solution is just to develop the gas beneath your feet.
But it's not just gas that's hit community opposition. In far north Queensland, wildlife photographer Stephen Nowakowski has devoted his life to protecting the environment.
Yeah, I've spent 3 decades as an activist really and as a volunteer working to try to keep trees in the ground.
The former Greens candidate never imagined his love of nature would collide with the push to save the planet from rising carbon emissions. But that changed as he filmed the environmental destruction caused by building a wind farm.
The end game here is to achieve net zero. Pushing roads and clearing forests and fragmenting forests just is an oxymoron towards that goal of trying to achieve net zero, because the first thing we need to be doing is keeping trees in the ground.
Stephen rallied the Atherton Tablelands community to stand against another project known as the Cholumban wind farm.
So effectively every ridge you see here would have had turbines on them.
It meant clearing 509 hectares of vegetation next to a wet tropics World Heritage Area. Indigenous leader Tom Gertz was one of many who joined the fight.
Yeah, I was very, very shattered when the government wanted to come in and put these big windmills in. They didn't consult with the traditional people.
And the community won. The wind farm was rejected by the federal government, which deemed the risk to the environment was too high.
Everybody got to understand, you never going to come in here and desecrate my country.
But Stephen was just getting started and is determined to sound an alarm on the damage industrial wind farms do to the land.
Well, Chris Bowen has publicly said that we need one of these turbines erected every 14 hours and 22,000 solar panels a day by 2030 to reach our targets.
In order to hit the government's renewable energy target, Australia has to build more than one wind turbine larger than this every single day for the next 6 years. They will march across the landscape from sea to shining sea in their thousands, transforming it forever and making it look like this.
So I've calculated how many turbines are in the pipeline for Queensland, mostly on the Great Dividing Range. And at the moment, there's around 3,127 turbines in the pipeline for Queensland. But that number's changing every week.
Stephen has used his training as a cartographer to map the number of wind and solar farms that will need to be built on the national electricity market to hit the government targets, stretching from far north Queensland through New South Wales, Victoria, west to Port Lincoln in South Australia, and across the Bass Strait to Tasmania.
The Australian public have got no idea. I've got to laugh. They've got no idea what's in store.
And all of this widely scattered generation will be strung together with a web of transmission lines.
We've identified an additional around 10,000 kilometres of transmission that needs to get built.
By 2050.
By 2050, about half of that in the next decade.
Make it happen with Transgrid.
In New South Wales, Transgrid knows it has a big job ahead of it.
We have 13,000 kilometres of line today, and we're building another 1,300 kilometres more.
That's a lot then. That's like a 10% build on the network that you already have.
That is correct. And we haven't built large projects in a very long time.
Transmission lines are another flashpoint. like the HumeLink project in New South Wales.
Australia's clean energy future depends on critical transmission projects like HumeLink.
HumeLink is really critical in our infrastructure, being able to support both Sydney as well as the communities along the path of HumeLink.
The line cuts through southern New South Wales, where Michael Katz marks one of the 300 trees that will be felled on his property.
It's very old, probably 300-400 years old, and I just want people to realise the sort of environmental damage which is done when we build these kind of pieces of infrastructure.
The new towers will stride alongside the old.
About 100 metres this way from that line, they will build a new 500 kV line, which will have a different form and which is basically twice as high and with twice as many wires as this one.
The community wants the line to go underground, but Transgrid says that's too expensive.
It's at least 5 times more than what an overhead line would be when you're looking at a 500 kV voltage.
That estimate is hotly disputed, but one thing is not in doubt. The cost of this project has almost tripled, from just over $1 billion to nearly $5 billion.
I think there's no chance that it will come in on time, on budget.
Are you confident that the numbers that we're seeing now, that it'll be around about $4.6 billion and delivered by 2027, that is where it's going to land?
We're getting to the point where we're actually going in for regulatory approval on the pricing, and at that point, you're locked in.
The transmission line will connect Sydney to the new Snowy Mountains pumped hydro project.
It's Snowy Hydro 2.0. It's going to be the biggest battery, if you like, in the Southern Hemisphere.
Announced in March 2017, it was to be built in 4 years and cost $2 billion.
Strategically located between Sydney and Melbourne, Snowy 2.0 will link 2 existing dams through underground tunnels, and a power station will be built almost 1 kilometre underneath them.
The cost has gone up 5 times. It's now $12 billion.
Ted Woodley is a former managing director of China Light and Power.
But it's really about twice that if you include all the costs for the project, particularly financing and transmission. The government has kicked in $4 billion and a $4.5 billion loan, and vast areas of Kosciuszko National Park have been destroyed over a distance of 35 kilometres.
The bill for Snowy will be picked up by taxpayers, and consumers should worry about spiralling transmission costs, because once a project is approved by the Australian Energy Regulator, the cost is written into your electricity bill forever.
Can you just tell us how much on someone's bill would be the cost of transmission?
It's about 8 to 9% is what we expect with these projects to be the portion of the bill.
And there could be an even bigger hit to the distribution charge, which makes up 35% of your power bill.
That network of distribution is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kilometres across Australia, connecting all the homes and businesses across this enormous country we've got.
The old distribution system was built for a one-way flow of power. With rooftop solar exports, it now runs in both directions. That adds stress to the system, as does the growing fleet of electric vehicles.
For every new EV that comes onto a street, it's like adding a whole nother home's load, right, to that street.
That means parts of the distribution system might also need to be rebuilt.
It could get massively expensive to take the day's, grid that was designed 100 years ago and actually make it prepared and robust and reliable and resilient to take on this energy transition that we're marching towards.
The regulator responsible for approving network charges refused repeated requests to be interviewed. But on the regulator's website, Claire Savage has warned of a wall of capital expenditure coming at consumers. These network capital costs will be baked in, not just for today, but for many years to come.
The need for more capacity and more infrastructure on the poles and wires along our streets is going to add to the cost of our bills.
So let's add this up. As coal exits, wholesale prices are going up. Transmission costs must rise, and the distribution charges, well, that could be the biggest hit of all.
I actually worry about the Australians who are battling it out every day. Those are the ones who are going to feel the greatest impact from power price rises, from blackouts. You know, those are going to be the households that are struggling when their energy prices are rising.
And more bills now include time of use charges, with a higher cost charged at times of peak demand. That's the mornings and the evenings when most people need electricity. So energy rationing is already a reality for people like Belinda.
We turn off every second light globe. We use $2 Kmart light globes to light the house. We have one small bar heater going in the family room, one bar heater going in the hallway, and then it's blankets, hot water bottles, and basically using the dog to keep warm. That's where it's at.
And what about that last line in your bill for environmental charges? Well, that subsidises large and small renewable energy schemes. Since 2013, Australian electricity customers have contributed $14 billion to subsidise large-scale wind and solar developers, and another $11.5 billion to pay for rooftop solar for households and businesses.
Is there any likelihood we will see people's power bills coming down?
And what I can't answer is my bill going to go up or down? I wish I had the answer to that. But our remit is to design the lowest cost pathway through the transition, and I can tell you that by following the integrated system plan, it is the lowest cost pathway for Australian homes and businesses.
Remember, the old electricity system delivered power for between $20 and $40 a megawatt hour. Stephen Wilson has tried to calculate the cost of the new system.
You're up around the $200 per megawatt hour level, and that's just to get the electrons onto the system. That's before you've put it into the transmission system, recovered the cost of the transmission system, which is now more expensive than it was. You know, you're talking at least 2 times, maybe 3 times, maybe more. And then finally into the local distribution wires and to the customers. So you're just talking about multiples of cost increase.
There's a line that a lot of people will latch on to that as we move toward more renewable sources of energy, the costs will decline because we don't have to pay for fuel. But we do have to pay for the capital required to convert free wind and free sunshine into electricity. We're going to have to pay for the capital to distribute it to customers. And we're going to have to pay for the creation of these reliability services.
As wind and solar generation grows, the reliability of electricity grids is weakening.
So we're seeing the reserve margin excess that we used to have in this country has gone away, and more areas are susceptible to energy interruption.
And nowhere in the national electricity market is more unstable than South Australia, which has one of the highest penetrations of wind and solar generation on the planet.
Yes, we have to intervene in the South Australian market very often to make sure that there's enough system strength by directing on some gas plants to make sure that we have that heartbeat of the system.
It all comes at a cost, and South Australia has the highest retail power prices in Australia. Old, reliable generators also face the stress on equipment of having to ramp up and down to match a constantly shifting power source.
Which means that we have to continue to find ways to come down lower in generation and move our generation around in response to that.
So, with reliability risks growing, energy reserve margins falling, and delays in building new generation, the possibility of blackouts is rising.
So this is essentially the fastest charger that you can get?
At the moment, we are going out to 400 kilowatts as well.
The first thing that it does is allow two-way power flow protection.
Driver can run here, and when he finishes, he can see how well he did against Max Verstappen.
Energy Week is the yearly jamboree for everybody involved in running the electricity system. Generators, regulators, retailers and a host of others. It's part talkfest and part trade fair, and the atmosphere here is unashamedly optimistic. But the undercurrent here this year is a deep fear that the energy transition might be running off the rails.
We're now moving to a system of much smaller disaggregated sources of energy, and so the engineering of a renewables grid is completely different. So it's not just a like-for-like replacement. It's not just that the wind and sun are intermittent. It's that we have to completely replace all the ways in which electricity works.
The system rebuild is now running at half the pace needed to meet the 2030 deadline. What are your concerns about what might happen?
Look, right now we are at a critical phase where we do need to see a step up in investment, and that's both in generation and in transmission.
As delays grow and costs rise, red lights are flashing everywhere on an energy transition that's not going to plan. State governments are now paying coal-fired power plants like Eraring in New South Wales to extend their lives.
Now, they may stay on 2 years or 4 or even 6 years. They'll stay on until we can get all the kit in place to replace Eraring. And Eraring is the biggest power station in the country. So that's going to be like that, but harder with every coal-fired generator that closes from here on in.
The risk that the lights will go out is growing, and few understand what that means. Electricity is the life support system for civilization. Without it, everything will collapse.
Well, Mike Tyson said, everyone has a great plan until they get punched in the face. I worry that we may get punched in the face with an interruption in our energy supply.
I don't mind it. I like them.
On the road in the United States, where some of the fights echo what's happening in Australia.
So it has made a huge impact on the local community. In the aggregate, just the payments to the ranchers have totaled about $2 million a year. So that money is coming into the local economy in addition to the taxes.
But here, as everywhere, the turbines are seen as a mixed blessing. On the whole, has there been an economic benefit for the town out of it?
Economically, yes, I would say so.
But has it caused any division within the town?
Absolutely. I mean, it 100% ruins a skyline. If you're used to a good hill country view, that's gone, because you're looking at a big giant windmill in your view.
But there are big differences. Near Houston is the Petronova carbon capture and storage project.
So, Dave, how important is this technology?
This technology is very, very important because we have taken carbon capture technology, boosted it up to commercial scale, and attached it to an existing coal plant so that we can get the affordability and the reliability of coal, but making it increasingly cleaner by removing 90% of the carbon dioxide and virtually all the sulfur from it.
Carbon capture is written into other countries' plans for hitting net zero.
The body of research and the technical studies that support how the world might get to net zero by 2050, CCS has got to be part of the solution, and in increasing amounts. So the US is embracing it wholeheartedly, Europe is embracing it wholeheartedly.
The story is different in Australia.
Essentially, the support for carbon capture and storage from most federal and state governments is really, really low.
Another zero-emission power source has sparked an even bigger brawl.
Electricity is cheaper where there is a presence of nuclear energy.
We're not planning to introduce the most expensive form of energy available, which is nuclear energy.
Just about every continent has nuclear power plants except for Australia, actually.
Not far from the lush greens of Augusta in Georgia is the Vogtle nuclear power plant. This year it opened the second of 2 new reactors.
It's the largest generator of clean, carbon-free electricity in the United States.
The reactors had a difficult birth. Westinghouse went bankrupt as the timelines and the budget blew out. Now that it's running, John Williams says it was worth it.
It's $21.5 billion for an asset that could last 60 to 80 years. We plan to operate them 60. We have potential to operate them 80 to 100 years, actually. So a very, very long time. And the benefit of nuclear power is its fuel cost. It has a very, very low fuel cost. If we only had renewables and the sun wasn't shining, or the wind wasn't blowing, then how would we provide the light? So we have to have other sources that we can dispatch when we need the energy.
Well, you can be baseload and I'll be solar.
Okay, well that means I'm going to run all the time.
I'll get back to you in the morning.
Okay.
One uranium fuel pellet is about this size. It's equivalent in energy to 3 barrels of oil or 1 tonne of coal or 17,000 cubic feet of natural gas. In each of the reactors in the nuclear power plant behind me, there are 18 million of these. All up, delivering enough power to run more than 4 million homes 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. This is only the second nuclear plant to be built in the United States in the last 30 years. The industry was already stalling before the 3 Mile Island meltdown in 1979 hammered the last nail into its coffin.
An unexpected release of more radiation today from the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant.
When a valve opened, releasing radioactive steam.
Plant Vogel has multiple layers of safety built into its design.
In the event of an accident here at the site, we have 750,000 gallons of water sitting on top of our power plants that will drain down without the use of any pumps. There's no electric power required. We're just going to use gravity.
There are also defences against acts of terror.
When you look here, what you actually see is the shield building is the cylindrical building. And the shield building was designed, this is designed after our September 11th events here in the United States. So it's designed specifically for aircraft impact.
Both major parties in America are now all in on nuclear energy. The Biden administration Energy Secretary opened the final unit at Plant Vogel.
To reach our goal of getting to net zero by 2050, we have to at least triple our current nuclear capacity in this country. That means we've got to add 200 more gigawatts by 2050. Okay, 2 down, 198 to go.
California had intended to shut down all nuclear generation. It's now hit pause, extending the life of its last nuclear plant.
I think the sense was that we were not ready to retire that 2,100 megawatt nuclear plant before we had sufficient capacity to replace it.
California is watching nuclear developments elsewhere with interests.
I do think you're going to see significant expansion of nuclear in other parts of the world and maybe even the country in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And I think California will have to watch that very carefully.
Because the growth of artificial intelligence is driving a demand for staggering amounts of power.
One of the characteristics of these data center loads that we're seeing is that they're extremely large. We've heard reports of 1 to 1.5 gigawatt data centers. That's, a gigawatt is a nuclear unit. Or another way to think about a gigawatt, it's the entire load of San Francisco in a single undiversified load. We've never dealt with a problem like that.
The greatest testament to the nuclear renaissance in the United States is that Microsoft has now signed a deal to reopen 3 Mile Island.
It's $1.6 billion to revive it, agreeing to sell all the output to Microsoft.
But now, with money from Microsoft, which has a voracious appetite for power because of artificial intelligence.
In Australia, it's illegal to build a nuclear power plant. The dire state of the energy debate in this country makes experts like Jeff Bongers despair.
No nuclear, no carbon capture and storage, or limited. No transmission, harder to get wind farms and solar farms in agricultural land. All of that complexity is going to mean that our prices of power are going to go up, or the lights are going to go out.
And almost all of the debate so far has been focused on decarbonising electricity. But that's the easy part, just a fraction of the real cost of net zero.
Net zero means we're decarbonising steel production and cement and all these industrial processes. It's not just electricity.
Fossil fuel is embedded in our lifestyle. It's essential to the production of steel, cement and plastic, even the fertiliser that grows our food, and the world runs on oil.
So the world today consumes 100 million barrels of oil every single day. That didn't happen overnight. That happened over about 120 years.
Oil and gas are not just fuels. They're part of the chemical structure of a long list of everyday items.
It's in our clothing. It's in the furniture we're in. It's in our cars. It's in our cell phones. It's a feedstock to so many products. And I think most people just don't understand how oil and gas is part of everything we do in our modern life. And what's being proposed is to ramp that back dramatically in the upcoming 25 years.
As farmers like Sean Nolan will tell you, gas is also used in the chemical process of making fertiliser.
We make urea by obviously extracting nitrogen out of the atmosphere and using natural gas in order to go through a process in which we produce urea, which is what we use as the main nutrient source for our crops. We need fossil fuels in this environment to be able to farm sustainably, otherwise food prices will double.
Most of us never stop to consider how the world actually works, how things are made, how fossil fuel is so deeply embedded in our built environment that we never actually see it. Take these Freddo frogs made at this iconic Cadbury factory here in Hobart. The boilers and the ovens that made them run on gas.
Yeah, it's not something that logically comes to mind, but certainly in a lot of food manufacturing environments, steam and hot water are critical requirements. And to be able to do that, you normally have boilers because you need to get to 90 degrees or more. And boilers are most efficiently run, and in most environments these days are run on gas.
Industrial heat is an elemental part of manufacturing. Both gas and coal supply it, and replacing them is not as easy as it sounds.
You might need it for chemical processing, for mining processing, for cement, for steel production. All of those sorts of processes need high industrial heat. A renewable energy by itself cannot provide the high levels of heat that is needed for all of those different processes.
It's even true in the production of chocolate.
Electrification is certainly an attractive option, but it hasn't been perfected, the technology. It's certainly not as efficient. It doesn't have the speed. So there's still advances required to be able to electrify boilers, which are an important component in this.
Business would have to bear the costs of electrification, and they will be high.
Look, I know when we look at the boilers, we start talking numbers in the tens of millions of dollars, and that's just at the one site down in Claremont.
But the costs go well beyond business. The government plan demands that individuals replace gas and petrol and diesel with electricity, buying electric cars, electric heating and stoves, putting in solar panels and connecting them to batteries.
So one of the things that I think has been challenging is we're not using data to have the conversation. We're using aspiration, we're using goals, but the fundamental data that will help us understand what's required to get to the place we want to be, that's not been laid out for the Australian people.
And how would grids cope with the demand to electrify everything?
If we were to electrify everything, that would mean we would have to quintuple the size of the electric grid in North America. I just don't see that happening.
In order to understand the size of the decarbonisation task, you need to look at the amount of oil, coal and gas in the world's total energy consumption, what's called primary energy. And in the last 25 years, the amount of fossil fuel in primary energy has dropped from 85% to 81%. And the task is to get that number near zero in the next 25 years?
And I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. And the costs, I don't know that anybody really has their arms around the costs to make this kind of change.
The point is to cut carbon emissions. So, how is the world doing? Since the world began its carbon-cutting journey at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, global carbon emissions have risen every single year, except for the financial crisis and when COVID shut down the planet. The only thing that's changed is where the fossil fuel is burned. Global coal production hit its highest ever level last year, and China now burns 56% of it. And now...
Look what happened. Is this crazy?
The once and future president has been resurrected.
America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate.
Donald Trump will shake the world, upend the international climate consensus, and might encourage other nations to follow his lead.
And we will drill, baby, drill. We're going to drill, baby, drill.
The lessons on this energy journey are that the grid we are building is expensive and unreliable.
We clearly have been putting a very significant priority around carbon and the environmental footprint of those assets, entirely appropriate given the implications of carbon in the atmosphere. But we're now realizing that, hey, we're creating reliability issues for ourselves and we're creating affordability issues as well. So we're going to have to get those back, I believe we're going to have to get those back in balance.
To restore that balance, we need to keep every option open.
Yeah, so I believe in net zero. We need to make a transition. I now believe nuclear is going to be part of that solution.
We are yet to invent the technologies that could deliver the political promises of net zero.
Anyone who indicates that our pathway to net zero is easy hasn't done the work.
And that the primary purpose of an electricity system is to deliver affordable, reliable power.
It's not just about me, it's not just about the budget, it's about my family. I see this as a political issue. I consider that when mothers are dumpster diving to feed their families, that's not okay.
No matter what Australia does from here, the cost of electricity is going to go up, and that will hurt individuals and industry, and the cost will fall hardest on the poor. And no one can tell you the real cost of net zero, but it will be measured in the trillions, and no country will hit that target without some very creative accounting. But one thing is certain, the fires of industry will keep burning, if not here, then somewhere else.